The cabin shakes violently. Oxygen masks drop. Passengers scream as the plane starts to dive. Suddenly, the galley door flies open. The frantic air hostess scans the first-class cabin desperately until her eyes lock onto her. The quiet woman everyone ignored, now fully awake. "Firebird," she shouts above the chaos. "We need Firebird." The cabin falls silent. All eyes turn to her as she rises from seat 3A, her demeanor transforming from anonymous passenger to commanding officer in an instant. No one had noticed her before. Now no one can look away. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoy stories of unsung heroes, consider subscribing to see more compelling narratives like this one. The first-class cabin of Flight 847 hummed with quiet luxury. Soft lighting illuminated the spacious leather seats as the plane cruised at 37,000 feet somewhere over the Midwest. Flight attendants moved with practiced grace through the cabin, offering champagne and warm towels to passengers settling in for the 6-hour transcontinental journey. In seat 3A sat Dr. Claire Morgan, a woman whose understated appearance belied her extraordinary past. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple knot, her tailored navy suit immaculate but unremarkable. To casual observers, she appeared to be just another business executive, perhaps a consultant or corporate lawyer. Nothing about her commanded special attention, which was precisely how she preferred it. "Champagne, ma'am." Flight attendant Sarah leaned slightly, offering a tray of flutes filled with golden bubbles. Claire glanced up, her eyes clear and alert. "No, thank you. Just water for now." Sarah smiled professionally and moved on to the next passenger. Across the aisle, Tech CEO Mason Caldwell accepted his second glass with boisterous enthusiasm. "Excellent vintage," he announced to no one in particular, loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "Though I prefer the 2015 Ballinger they serve on Emirates." Claire turned her attention to her book, but Caldwell wasn't finished broadcasting his importance. Heading to the Aviation Expo in San Francisco, he informed his seatmate, a weary-looking businessman who had already donned noise-canceling headphones. "I'm giving the keynote on private aviation innovations. My company just acquired a flight simulator manufacturer, top of the line." The businessman nodded politely without removing his headphones. Undeterred, Caldwell continued expounding on his extensive knowledge of aircraft, speaking loudly enough that several rows could hear his self-proclaimed expertise. Claire checked her watch, a simple but sturdy timepiece with a dark face that stood out against her slim wrist. The motion caught Caldwell's attention. "That's an interesting choice," he remarked, leaning across the aisle toward her. "Isn't that a men's pilot watch? Bit chunky for a lady, don't you think?" Claire met his gaze with a neutral expression. "It tells the time accurately. That's all I require of it." "Fair enough." Caldwell chuckled condescendingly. "Though if you're interested in aviation timepieces, I could recommend something more suited to your wrist size. I have quite the collection myself." "I'm sure you do," Claire replied, returning to her book with a finality that would have discouraged most people. Caldwell, however, was not most people. "Been flying private for years," he continued. "Get to know the pilots pretty well. Always fascinating to watch them work. I've picked up enough that I could probably handle the controls in a pinch." When Claire didn't respond, he finally turned his attention elsewhere, leaving her to the peaceful solitude she preferred. The plane encountered a brief patch of turbulence, a slight jostle that barely disturbed the passengers' drinks. Claire's hand instinctively gripped the armrest, her knuckles whitening momentarily before she consciously relaxed her fingers. Her eyes flicked toward the window, assessing the cloud formations with a professional scrutiny rather than a passenger's curiosity. For a fleeting second, her mind flashed to another cockpit. Another moment of turbulence, alarms blaring as her hands gripped flight controls with the same precision now directed toward her book. She blinked the memory away as quickly as it had come. Captain John Carter's voice came over the intercom, smooth and reassuring. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're receiving reports of an unexpected weather system developing along our route. We'll be adjusting our course slightly to maintain a comfortable journey. Current flight time remains approximately 5 hours and 40 minutes. Cabin crew, prepare for possible light turbulence. The announcement prompted a fresh wave of commentary from Mason Caldwell. Weather systems this time of year can be tricky. I was telling my pilot just last week that the jet stream patterns have been unusually volatile. If I were flying this bird, I'd climb another few thousand feet to get above it completely. Dr. Claire Morgan reached into her carry-on bag and retrieved a small pill case, extracting a single white tablet. As Sarah passed by again, she requested another water. "Are you feeling unwell?" Sarah asked with professional concern. "Just hoping to get some sleep," Claire replied. "Would you mind waking me only if absolutely necessary?" Sarah nodded, noting the unusual specificity of the request. "Of course, ma'am, I'll make sure you're not disturbed unless it's important." "Thank you." Claire swallowed the tablet with a sip of water, then reclined her seat slightly. Her movements were precise and economical, each action executed with an efficiency that spoke of rigorous training rather than mere habit. As she closed her eyes, Caldwell's voice continued to dominate the cabin atmosphere. "My extensive simulator experience has taught me that these Airbus models handle crosswinds differently than Boeing's. It's all about understanding the thrust vectors and control surfaces." Claire took a deep breath and allowed herself to drift towards sleep, her consciousness fading as the drone of the engines and Caldwell's pontificating blended into white noise. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was a mental calculation of their position over the continent, a professional habit she had never managed to break. An hour into the flight, the first hints of trouble manifested in the cockpit. Captain John Carter frowned at the instrument panel as First Officer Daniel Hayes ran through routine checks. "Pressure reading seems off in hydraulic system 3, Hayes noted. "Within parameters, but fluctuating." "Monitor it," Carter instructed. "Could be a sensor issue." "How's our weather looking now?" "Storm cell is intensifying faster than forecast," Hayes replied, studying the radar. "We've got good clearance on the north side, though." The plane encountered another patch of turbulence, more pronounced this time. In the first-class cabin, a few passengers looked up from their laptops and tablets. Claire remained asleep, her breathing deep and even despite the disturbance. Caldwell seized the opportunity to demonstrate his knowledge. "Classic clear air turbulence," he announced to nearby passengers. "Perfectly normal, though. If they'd chosen a better route, we wouldn't be experiencing it at all." Young flight attendant Rachel moved through the cabin, checking that passengers had their seat belts fastened. She paused briefly beside Claire's seat, noting how the sleeping woman remained perfectly still despite the intermittent jostling. Most sleeping passengers would shift or stir during turbulence, but Claire appeared unnaturally composed, as though her body had been trained to maintain stability even in unconsciousness. Back in the cockpit, the situation was becoming more complex. "Hydraulic pressure still fluctuating," Hayes reported. "And now, System 2 is showing similar patterns. Could be coincidence, but both at once seems unlikely." Captain Carter nodded grimly. "Let's run full diagnostics and alert maintenance to have a team ready at our destination. Better to be thorough." As Hayes initiated the diagnostic sequence, a small alert appeared on another screen. "Captain, we've got an anomaly in the electrical bus distribution." Carter frowned. "That's unrelated to hydraulics. Run a cross-check." The turbulence increased as they continued their flight path, the plane occasionally dipping and rising in the unstable air. In the cabin, flight attendants began securing loose items and checking on passenger comfort. Claire remained asleep, though her eyes moved rapidly beneath closed lids, suggesting her rest was not entirely peaceful. Her right hand occasionally twitched, fingers moving in small, precise patterns that might have reminded an observer of someone manipulating flight controls. Caldwell had finally exhausted his audience's patience and turned to his tablet, though he continued to make small, critical comments whenever the plane encountered rougher air. "Pilots taking the lazy approach to this turbulence. Should be changing altitude more aggressively." 30 minutes later, the situation in the cockpit had evolved from routine anomalies to genuine concern. "Captain, 3 separate systems showing irregularities now," Daniel Hayes reported. "Pattern is inconsistent with any normal fault tree." Captain John Carter's expression darkened. "Pull up the passenger manifest." Just a hunch. Let me see it. As Hayes brought up the manifest on his screen, Carter scanned the names methodically. His eyes stopped abruptly on one entry, Morgan, Claire J., Seat 3A. It can't be, he muttered, staring at the name. Problem, sir? Before Carter could answer, a cascade of warning lights illuminated the cockpit. The plane lurched suddenly, banking several degrees to the left before Carter could correct it. What the hell was that? Hayes exclaimed. Multiple system failures, Carter replied, his voice tense but controlled as he worked the controls. Take manual control of rudder compensation. I'm going to try resetting the electrical distribution. The sudden movement caused several passengers to gasp. Drinks spilled, and overhead bins shifted. The turbulence was no longer merely uncomfortable but alarming. Dr. Claire Morgan's eyes snapped open instantly, her transition from deep sleep to full alertness occurring in a fraction of a second. Unlike other awakening passengers who looked around in confusion, her gaze was immediately sharp and assessing, scanning the cabin with professional precision. The plane shuddered again. This time, oxygen masks dropped from overhead compartments throughout the aircraft. Passengers cried out in alarm as flight attendants began emergency procedures. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm and place your oxygen masks over your nose and mouth, came the automated announcement. As chaos erupted around her, Claire sat perfectly still, her eyes now focused on the galley door with an intensity that suggested she was calculating rather than panicking. She didn't immediately reach for her oxygen mask, instead watching the flight attendants' movements and the plane's behavior with analytical calm. Rachel noticed Claire's unusual reaction amidst the panic. While other passengers scrambled for their masks, some crying or calling out, the woman in 3A appeared to be mentally working through something, her fingers now retrieving a small notebook from her jacket pocket. In the cockpit, alarms blared as Carter and Hayes fought to stabilize the aircraft. Sir, hydraulics failing, backup systems compromised, Hayes reported, his voice tight with strain. That's impossible unless someone deliberately, Carter began, then stopped as realization dawned. His eyes flicked back to the passenger manifest to the name that had caught his attention moments before. The plane lurched again, more violently this time. Hayes was thrown against his harness, his head striking the side panel. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead as he struggled to maintain consciousness. Stay with me, Hayes, Carter ordered, but the first officer's eyes were unfocused. The captain made a split-second decision, reaching for his seatbelt release. In the cabin, Mason Caldwell's earlier bravado had evaporated. We're going down, he said, his voice high and tight with fear. The pilots have lost control. Claire glanced at him briefly before returning to the small calculations she was writing in her notebook. Her calm was so incongruous with the surrounding panic that it seemed almost surreal. Flight attendant Sarah struggled with the galley door, finally managing to wrench it open against the changed cabin pressure. She stood in the doorway, blood streaming from a cut on her forehead, eyes desperately scanning the first-class cabin until they locked onto Claire. The recognition between them was instantaneous and electric. Firebird! Sarah shouted above the blaring alarms, her voice cutting through the cacophony of terrified passengers. We need Firebird now. Authorization Bravo Delta 927. The cabin fell into an eerie silence, punctuated only by the persistent alarm and the sound of air rushing through oxygen masks. Every head turned toward Claire Morgan, who remained perfectly still in seat 3A, her expression shifting from analytical calm to grim resolution. Is she talking to you? Caldwell asked incredulously, oxygen mask dangling forgotten from his hand. Without answering, Claire stood, her movements fluid and confident despite the violently shaking aircraft. In one smooth motion, she removed her tailored jacket, revealing a fitted black top that allowed for unrestricted movement. The transformation was subtle but profound, her posture straightening as years of concealed military bearing emerged like a butterfly from a chrysalis. Commander Claire Morgan, Naval Aviation Experimental Test Squadron, she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the cabin without needing to shout. The authority in her tone was unmistakable, silencing even the most panicked passengers. Mason Caldwell stared open-mouthed. Wait, you're Firebird? she confirmed, already moving toward the galley. Yes, and this aircraft is in trouble. Flight attendant Sarah addressed the stunned passengers, steadying herself against the galley doorframe as the plane continued to shudder. Commander Morgan designed the emergency protocols for this aircraft series, protocols that were never implemented after she was blamed for the Meridian disaster. The name Meridian triggered recognition in several passengers. 3 years ago, the experimental aircraft had suffered catastrophic failure during a test flight. The pilot, never named in public reports, had somehow landed the craft when all simulations indicated it was impossible, saving 4 of the 6 crew members. Nevertheless, the program was scrapped, and the pilot discharged under mysterious circumstances. As Claire moved toward the galley, flight attendant Rachel blocked her path instinctively, years of training compelling her to keep passengers away from restricted areas. "Ma'am, I can't let you." "She's cleared," Sarah interrupted. "Highest possible authorization." Rachel stepped aside, watching in confusion as Claire moved toward the cockpit with the confidence of someone returning to a familiar workspace. Inside, First Officer Daniel Hayes was slumped in his seat, semi-conscious. The instrument panel flashed with multiple red warnings, some of which weren't covered in standard emergency procedures. "Status," Claire demanded, immediately taking the empty first officer's seat and scanning the instruments. "Multiple cascading failures," Captain John Carter replied, no longer captain to passenger but pilot to pilot. "Started with hydraulic system 3, spread to electrical distribution, then backup systems. Nothing in the emergency handbook covers this combination." "Because it's deliberate sabotage," Claire stated, her fingers dancing across the controls with practiced precision. "Someone targeted the redundancy architecture. These failures aren't random." "How can you be sure?" "Because I designed the security protocols to prevent exactly this scenario." She pointed to a specific pattern on one of the screens. "That sequence doesn't occur naturally. Someone knew exactly where to hit us." In the cabin, passengers clung to their oxygen masks and armrests as the aircraft continued its erratic movement. Caldwell sat frozen, his earlier bombast replaced by ash and fear. Across the aisle, a woman in her 30s studied him with growing recognition. "You're Mason Caldwell," she said, voice muffled by her oxygen mask. "CEO of Pinnacle Tech." He nodded weakly, grateful for the momentary distraction from their dire situation. "And that woman," she continued, "the one the air hostess called for. She's Commander Claire Morgan, isn't she? The scapegoat from the Meridian program." "What are you talking about?" Caldwell asked. The woman removed her mask briefly to introduce herself. "Sophie Bennett, investigative journalist. I covered the Meridian disaster. Or rather, I tried to. Most of the details were classified. But that woman, she's the pilot who was blamed for the crash." In the cockpit, Claire had taken partial control, working in tandem with Carter to stabilize the aircraft. "We've lost 40% of our hydraulics," she reported, voice steady. "Standard emergency procedures won't work here." "What options do we have?" Carter asked, fighting the controls as the plane attempted another unexpected bank to the left. 3 years ago, I developed an emergency backup system for precisely this scenario. It was deemed too expensive for implementation across the fleet." Her hands moved across the control panel, accessing systems that weren't in the standard operating manual. "But the architecture is still embedded in the aircraft's core systems. You're saying you can activate features that don't officially exist?" "I designed them. I know where they're buried in the code." Claire's eyes never left the instruments as she spoke. "But I'll need your help. This is going to be unlike any landing procedure you've ever performed." Back in the cabin, flight attendant Sarah approached Rachel, who stood transfixed near the galley door. "What's happening?" Sarah whispered. "Who is that woman?" Before Rachel could answer, the plane dropped suddenly, causing both women to grab nearby seats for stability. Oxygen masks swung wildly from the ceiling panels. "I don't know exactly," Rachel admitted once they'd steadied themselves. "But the captain seemed to know her, called her Firebird." Across the aisle, Sophie Bennett continued her impromptu briefing to Mason Caldwell and nearby passengers. The Meridian program was developing next-generation emergency systems for commercial aircraft, revolutionary stuff that could save planes in situations that are currently unsurvivable. And she was blamed for its failure. A businessman asked, his fear momentarily supplanted by curiosity. Officially? Officially, yes, but my sources suggested she was the only reason anyone survived at all. There were rumors that the test was sabotaged, that she pulled off a landing that should have been physically impossible. Caldwell's eyes widened as he processed this information, recalling his earlier condescension toward Claire. And now she's flying this plane? If what I suspect is true, Sophie replied, she might be the only person in the world who can land it safely. In the cockpit, Claire had managed to access the hidden emergency system she designed years earlier. Lines of code scrolled across a secondary screen as she bypassed security protocols with a series of rapid commands. There, she said, hitting a final key sequence. We should have partial hydraulic restoration in 3 minutes, but we need to start planning our approach now. Where's the nearest suitable airport? Captain John Carter consulted the navigation system, which was thankfully still operational. Denver International is closest, about 127 miles southwest. Too far with our current system's degradation. We need something closer, even if it's smaller. Rollins Municipal in Wyoming, 52 miles north, single runway, 7,000 feet. Claire calculated rapidly. That'll work. We'll need to dump fuel to reduce landing weight with compromised electrical systems. That's risky. Everything about this situation is risky, Captain, she said, her voice carrying absolute conviction. But I've landed heavier aircraft on shorter runways with worse damage. This is our best option. As they worked to stabilize the aircraft and prepare for an emergency landing, Claire's mind flashed back briefly to the Meridian incident. The experimental aircraft had exhibited similar failure patterns moments before things went catastrophically wrong. She had saved 4 lives that day but lost 2 others, including her co-pilot. The subsequent investigation had placed the blame squarely on her shoulders, despite her insistence that the systems had been compromised. The memory sharpened her focus rather than distracting her. If her suspicions were correct, the same people who had sabotaged the Meridian test were behind this attack. But why this flight? Why now? Her thoughts were interrupted by Captain Carter. Denver Air Traffic Control is on the line. They're asking for identification and verification of our emergency status. Claire took the radio. This is Commander Claire Morgan, call sign Firebird, authorization code Sierra Tango 92775. We have multiple system failures consistent with deliberate sabotage and are declaring an emergency. There was a pause before the controller responded. Commander Morgan, our information shows you were grounded permanently following the Meridian incident. Circumstances change when 300 lives are at stake, she replied coolly. We need priority clearance to Rollins Municipal and emergency services standing by. Another pause, longer this time. When the controller spoke again, his tone had changed. Understood, Firebird. We're clearing airspace and notifying Rollins. Military escort is being scrambled to your position. Military escort? Carter questioned after she'd signed off. Standard protocol when sabotage is suspected, Claire explained, though they both knew there was more to it. Her re-emergence would set off multiple alerts throughout the defense and intelligence communities. In the cabin, Rachel had taken on the responsibility of keeping passengers informed. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm and keep your oxygen masks on. We are diverting to Rollins Municipal Airport for an emergency landing. Our captain and Commander Morgan are working to ensure everyone's safety. The mention of Claire's name caused a ripple of whispered conversations throughout the cabin. Sophie Bennett had become an impromptu information source, sharing what little public knowledge existed about the mysterious Firebird. She was the youngest test pilot ever accepted to the Naval Experimental Squadron, Sophie explained to the growing circle of listeners. Multiple commendations, unprecedented flight hours in experimental aircraft. After Meridian, she disappeared completely from public records. Mason Caldwell listened intently, his expression a complex mixture of embarrassment and awe as he recalled his patronizing comments about her watch. And she's been hiding in plain sight, working as what, a consultant? That's what I intend to find out, Sophie replied, her journalistic instincts fully engaged despite their perilous situation. The plane lurched again, then stabilized as Claire's emergency systems came online. The cabin lights flickered momentarily before steady illumination returned. A collective sigh of relief passed through the passengers. In the cockpit, Claire allowed herself a small nod of satisfaction. Partial hydraulic restoration achieved. We should have enough control to attempt a landing now. Denver confirms Rollins is prepared for our arrival, Captain John Carter reported. Emergency services standing by. Good. We'll need to brief the cabin crew on special procedures for this landing. It won't be smooth. As Carter called flight attendant Sarah into the cockpit for instructions, Claire continued working the controls, her movements betraying years of muscle memory that no amount of civilian cover could erase. She was back in her element, facing the same challenges that had ended her career 3 years earlier. Firebird, Carter said quietly once they were alone again. There's something you should know. This isn't a coincidence. I've already concluded that, she replied without looking up from the instruments. No, I mean your presence on this specific flight. The passenger manifest was changed last minute. Someone wanted you on this aircraft. This information caused Claire to pause briefly in her calculations. You're saying I was the target, or the solution? Depends which side arranged it, Carter suggested. The implication hung between them as they continued their descent toward Rollins Municipal Airport. If someone had orchestrated this entire situation, the sabotage, Claire's presence on the flight, then the emergency landing was just the beginning of whatever was unfolding. Through the cockpit window, Claire could now make out the distant runway of Rollins Municipal, a thin strip of concrete amid the Wyoming landscape. 2 military jets appeared in her peripheral vision, taking up escort positions on either side of the airliner. Firebird, this is Raptor 1, came a new voice over the radio. We have visual on your aircraft and are here to assist. Copy, Raptor 1, Claire responded. Be advised, we're attempting an emergency landing with compromised systems. Possible sabotage situation. Understood. We'll provide cover. As they made their final approach, Claire knew that whatever awaited her on the ground, vindication or further persecution, answers or more questions, her life of anonymity was over. Firebird had risen again, for better or worse. Rollins Municipal Airport had never handled an emergency of this magnitude. The small Wyoming airfield typically serviced private planes and local charters, not commercial airliners in distress. As Flight 847 approached, emergency vehicles lined the runway, their lights flashing against the backdrop of the surrounding planes. In the cockpit, Claire's focus was absolute as she guided the wounded aircraft toward the runway. Years of training and experience flowed through her hands as they worked the controls with a precision that even Captain Carter found remarkable. 10 miles out, Carter announced, handling communications while Claire concentrated on flight control. Wind shear reported near the runway threshold. Compensating, Claire replied, adjusting their approach angle slightly. We'll come in steeper than standard to maintain control authority. Prepare passengers for a hard landing. Through the cabin intercom, Carter addressed the passengers one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We are making our final approach to Rollins Municipal Airport. Our landing will be rougher than normal due to our technical difficulties. Please remain in brace position until the aircraft comes to a complete stop. Rachel and the other flight attendants moved through the cabin, checking that passengers were properly secured and in brace position. The atmosphere was tense but remarkably controlled, the earlier panic having subsided into a concentrated apprehension. In seat 5C, Mason Caldwell sat quietly, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. Across the aisle, Sophie Bennett had stowed her recording device but kept her notepad clutched tightly in her braced position, unwilling to lose her observations, even in potential disaster. 5 miles, Captain John Carter updated. Runway visual. Claire nodded, her eyes fixed on the approaching airstrip. Activating final approach configuration. The auxiliary systems will hold for landing, but expect asymmetric thrust on touchdown. The aircraft descended through the last few thousand feet, fighting crosswinds and the damaged control systems. Military escort planes remained alongside until the final approach, then peeled away as Flight 847 lined up with the runway. Firebird, this is Rollins Tower, came the voice of the local controller, clearly trying to project calm despite the unprecedented situation. Runway is clear. Emergency services standing by. Copy, Rollins, Claire responded. Be advised, we may depart the runway after touchdown due to compromised steering. In the final moments of flight, Claire's mind flashed back to the Meridian incident. The same warnings had flashed across her control panel then, the same resistance in the flight controls as she fought to save the experimental aircraft. This time, however, she had the benefit of experience. She knew exactly what was happening and how to counter it. 50 feet, Carter called out, monitoring altitude while Claire concentrated on controlling their descent rate. 40, 30, 20. The aircraft touched down hard, the impact reverberating through the cabin despite Claire's skilled handling. The right engine, compromised by the sabotage, flared momentarily before Claire shut it down. The plane veered slightly to the right before she compensated with left rudder and asymmetric braking. For several tense seconds, it wasn't clear if they would stay on the runway. The aircraft shuddered violently, the sound of protesting metal and stressed landing gear filling the cabin. Then, gradually, the plane began to slow, remaining on the tarmac as Claire expertly managed their deceleration. When they finally came to a stop, approximately two-thirds down the runway, a momentary silence fell over the aircraft. Then spontaneous applause erupted throughout the cabin, passengers releasing their tension in a collective expression of relief and gratitude. In the cockpit, Claire allowed herself a single deep breath before returning to professional mode. Shut down procedures, she instructed Carter, who nodded in admiration. That was the finest piece of flying I've ever witnessed, he said quietly as they worked through the emergency checklist. Emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft within moments of its stop, their lights bathing the cockpit in alternating red and blue glows. Through the windows, Claire could see military personnel among the first responders, confirming her suspicion that this situation extended far beyond a simple mechanical failure. Inside the cabin, flight attendants were assisting with an orderly evacuation. Despite the successful landing, standard protocol required passengers to exit via emergency slides, as the structural integrity of the aircraft couldn't be guaranteed after such a landing. Ladies and gentlemen, Sarah announced, please leave all personal belongings and proceed to the nearest exit. Remember, jump, don't sit, and move quickly away from the aircraft. As passengers began evacuating, Sophie Bennett made her way against the flow toward the cockpit, determined to reach Claire before military or airline officials could isolate her. Caldwell, seeing her intention, surprised himself by following. You can't go up there, Rachel attempted to intercept them. That woman just saved all our lives, Sophie replied firmly. And 3 years ago, someone destroyed her career for doing exactly the same thing. I won't let it happen again. Before Rachel could respond, the cockpit door opened. Claire emerged, supporting the semi-conscious First Officer Daniel Hayes with Captain Carter's help. Her expression remained composed, though the strain of the last hour showed in the tightness around her eyes. Commander Morgan, Sophie stepped forward, notebook in hand. Sophie Bennett, investigative journalist. I covered the Meridian incident. The public deserves to know the truth this time. Claire assessed the journalist with a quick glance. Miss Bennett, now isn't the time. We need to complete evacuation protocols. They'll silence you the moment we're off this plane, Sophie Bennett insisted. Just like last time. Before Claire could respond, Mason Caldwell stepped forward. Commander, I owe you an apology, he said, his typical arrogance replaced by genuine contrition. The way I spoke to you earlier was inexcusable. You're the real expert here, and I'm just a tech guy who plays with simulators. A flicker of surprise crossed Claire's face, but she acknowledged him with a brief nod. Apology accepted, Mr. Caldwell. Now, please proceed to the exits. Outside the aircraft, the situation was evolving rapidly. Military vehicles had joined the emergency responders, and personnel in unmarked black SUVs were establishing a perimeter around the scene. As passengers descended the emergency slides, they were being directed to a secure area away from media that had already begun to arrive. When Claire finally exited the aircraft, supporting First Officer Daniel Hayes down the slide with professional care, she was immediately approached by a group of military officers. At their center stood Air Force General Nathan Brooks, his stern expression a mixture of respect and weariness. "Commander Morgan," he addressed her formally. "We have a medical team for First Officer Hayes." Claire relinquished Hayes to the waiting medics before turning back to face Brooks. Their history was complicated. He had been on the review board that had terminated her career following the Meridian incident. "General," she acknowledged with military precision that belied her civilian attire. "I assume you're here about more than a mechanical failure." "This situation is now a matter of national security," Brooks confirmed, his voice low. "We need to debrief you immediately." From the gathering crowd of passengers, Sophie pushed forward, her journalist's instincts compelling her to witness this crucial interaction. Caldwell followed, using his CEO status to move through the security cordon. "General Brooks," Sophie called out, recognizing him from her previous research. "Will Commander Morgan be receiving proper recognition for saving this aircraft, or are you planning another cover-up like after Meridian?" The general's expression tightened at the public challenge. Passengers had gathered around, many filming with their phones despite security personnel attempting to prevent it. The situation was rapidly becoming uncontainable. Brooks glanced at the assembled crowd, then at the military aides flanking him before making a decision. He turned to Claire and, to everyone's surprise, raised his hand in a formal salute. "Commander Morgan," he said, voice carrying clearly to the onlookers. "On behalf of a grateful nation, I extend our sincere appreciation for your extraordinary service today." The symbolic gesture sent ripples through the gathered crowd. Military personnel present followed suit, saluting the woman who stood before them in civilian clothes but with unmistakable military bearing. Claire returned the salute crisply, years of training overriding her civilian cover. "Thank you, General, but I believe explanations are in order." "Indeed, they are," Brooks agreed, dropping his hand. "Which is why I'm authorized to inform you that as of 0600 this morning, all records relating to Project Meridian have been declassified by presidential order." This announcement clearly caught Claire by surprise. "Declassified?" "The investigation continued after your discharge, Commander. Evidence emerged 6 months ago proving your original claims of sabotage were correct." Brooks reached into his jacket and produced a sealed envelope. "This contains your formal reinstatement to active duty status and clearance of all previous charges, should you choose to accept it." As this extraordinary scene unfolded, passengers and crew watched in stunned silence. Sophie was frantically taking notes while Caldwell stood nearby, witnessing the vindication of the woman he had so casually dismissed hours earlier. Young flight attendant Rachel pushed through the crowd until she reached Claire. "Commander," she said, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "I joined the airlines because of you." Claire looked at her questioningly. "My older sister was in the Navy," Rachel explained. "She told me about a female test pilot who could outfly anyone, who changed what everyone thought was possible. She never mentioned your name. I guess it was classified, but she said you were the reason she believed women could excel in any role." Rachel paused, gathering courage. "When they grounded you, she was devastated. She'll be so happy to know the truth." This personal connection seemed to affect Claire more deeply than the general's formal recognition. For the first time since the crisis began, genuine emotion crossed her face, a mixture of pride and melancholy. "Thank her for her service," Claire replied softly. "And tell her Firebird still flies." As the immediate crisis subsided, passengers were being directed toward a temporary processing area where airline representatives had begun arranging alternate transportation. The mood had transformed from terror to a complex mixture of relief, excitement, and curiosity about the mysterious pilot who had saved them. Mason Caldwell approached Claire once more before security could whisk her away. "Commander, my company has significant defense contracts in aviation security. When you're ready to discuss what happened here today, I'd like to offer whatever resources you need." He handed her his business card. "No strings, no publicity, just support for whatever comes next." Claire studied him for a moment before accepting the card with a nod. "People can surprise you, Mr. Caldwell." "Apparently so," he replied with a self-deprecating smile. As Claire was escorted toward a waiting military vehicle, Sophie Bennett made one final attempt to secure her story. "Commander, the public deserves to know what really happened, both today and 3 years ago. Will you speak with me when this is over?" Claire paused, considering the journalist thoughtfully. "The truth deserves to be told correctly. Contact my office through General Brooks in 48 hours. Hours later, after debriefings and medical checks, the passengers of Flight 847 had been transferred to Denver International Airport for connecting flights to their original destinations. The events at Rollins had already made national news, though details remained sparse pending official statements. In the exclusive airline lounge, Sarah approached Claire with a glass of champagne. The commander sat alone by the window, watching planes take off and land with professional interest. "You declined this earlier," Sarah said, offering the flute. "I thought perhaps now you might accept." Claire smiled slightly and accepted the glass. "Thank you." As Sarah departed, Captain John Carter approached, having completed his own lengthy debriefing. He took the seat across from Claire, his expression one of profound respect. "They've offered me a position heading up a new aviation security task force," he said without preamble. "Investigating potential vulnerabilities across the commercial fleet." "Sounds important," Claire replied, sipping her champagne. "It is, and I've requested you as my deputy." Carter studied her reaction carefully. "Unless you're planning to return to test piloting." Claire turned her attention back to the window, watching as a Boeing 787 lifted gracefully into the evening sky. For 3 years, she had lived in self-imposed exile, carrying the weight of undeserved blame and lost colleagues. Now, unexpectedly, she had a chance to reclaim her purpose. "Ready to fly again, Firebird?" Carter asked quietly. She smiled slightly, the expression transforming her face from serious to quietly confident. "I never stopped." Outside, the sun was setting over the Rocky Mountains, casting long shadows across the runways. Within hours, the full story of Commander Claire Morgan would break across news outlets worldwide. By morning, everyone would know about the hero who had been sleeping in first class. But for now, in this moment of transition, Firebird allowed herself to simply watch the planes fly, knowing she would soon join them again where she truly belonged, in the sky. If you were gripped by this tale of courage and redemption, hit that like button to show your support and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling stories of unsung heroes. Don't forget to drop a comment below.